New Calvinism for Dummies. This is Extra 1, The Real John Piper. Okay, we're going to be looking at a video John Piper made to explain why he invited Doug Wilson, Pastor Doug Wilson, to his 2009 Desiring God conference. Alright, here in this first slide of the video, Piper starts out by saying that he wants to give an introduction to Doug Wilson, why he is eager, as we will see later on, to make him a part of this conference. And the reasoning he uses comes from a sermon that he listened to out of a series on Romans that Doug Wilson was doing. As we can see here, Doug Wilson's illustration was about the difference between good advice and good news. And he said good advice is a teacher saying to her class, you study hard, memorize your paradigms, do your homework, and get it in every night, and you will do fine on the final exam and passing this course. Really good advice, John Piper emphasizes. And then the exam comes and the teacher is walking down the aisle and she sees this young fella sitting over a blank piece of paper. Not able to write anything on the final exam, and she stops and says, just try to remember what you have studied and relax. All of that is really good advice, says John Piper, speaking of Doug Wilson's illustration. But if she says, scoot over and I will take the test for you, that's good news. Says Piper in the video about Doug Wilson's illustration, there are three things about that characterize Doug Wilson. First, it's true, and Doug gets the gospel right. Now, don't miss this. I have never been the least bit perplexed about all of the controversy concerning who John Piper invites to his conferences. That has never confused me at all. In New Calvinism, if you have the centrality of the objective gospel outside of us right, nothing else matters, because everything flows from that. Everything else is secondary. That's why it doesn't matter who they associate with. It's just that simple, and all of the controversy and perplexity about why Piper associates with these people speaks plainly to the fact that most Christians just have no clue what New Calvinism is all about. Especially substitutionary atonement and justification by faith alone. And as we will see, that's substitutionary atonement and justification by faith alone in sanctification. Okay, note carefully now what John Piper says. He, that is Jesus, is going, future tense, to take our place and his righteousness is going to count, for future tense, for me on the last day, and that will be, future tense, my solid ground. What last day? We need a righteousness on the last day? Look, this is right out of the Australian Forum's SDA doctrine that fuses justification and sanctification together. This is SDA investigative judgment. Our justification has to be maintained for the future judgment day. This is clearly in the context that Piper is speaking here. Okay? His doctrine, his gospel, is clearly a sanctification that maintains justification. Justification is not a finished work. For the Christian, there is no judgment to be found righteous in the future. That's already been determined. We've already been declared righteous. We've already received the righteousness of God accredited to our account in full. There is no judgment in the future for Christians to determine justification. This is clear. Piper continues, second, it's risky to give illustrations like that because somebody might say, well, if God is going to take the test for me, I can just fool around and all semester long. That's antinomian, says Piper. Piper continues, and my response is, if you don't preach in such a way that somebody responds like Romans 6:1, let us sin that grace may abound, you probably aren't preaching the gospel. Oh, really? There's nothing in Romans 6:1 about antinomianism. Anomia is a Greek New Testament word. That word appears nowhere in Romans 6:1, but the word does appear some 25 times in the New Testament, but not in Romans 6:1. Okay, this is one of the themes of the Sermon on the Mount, close to where it begins in 5:17. Skip down to verse 19. Jesus said, therefore, whoever relaxes one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. Keep that in mind, and now let's go to the conclusion of the Sermon on the Mount. Alright, Jesus says in verse 21 of chapter 7, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Skipping down to verse 23, and then I will declare to them, those who profess the Lord's name but don't do what he says, okay, he will say to them, I never knew you, depart from me, you workers of lawlessness. See that word lawlessness there? That's the word anomia, okay? Antinomian is in this verse. Now, immediately following, here's how Jesus concludes the Sermon on the Mount. Now this is immediately following the verse that does talk about antinomianism. And Jesus referred to doing his word in those verses. Again, Jesus says, reiterates here, everyone then. What's that? Everyone then. That's a transition that links it back to the previous thoughts. Who hears these words of mine and does them, other translations practices them, will be like a wise man who built his house upon a rock. Okay, what does John Piper believe about this? Pages 45 and 46 of The Truth About New Calvinism, I quote him and I read his take on what Christians are to do with the law. He says, read it and meditate on it as those who are dead to it, as the ground of your justification and the power of your sanctification. Read it and meditate in it as those for whom Christ is your righteousness and Christ is your sanctification. Link all of that back with what we've been previously talking to, which means read it and meditate it to know Christ better and to treasure him more. Now, what did Jesus say in the Sermon on the Mount? Is that what Christ said? He goes on, Christ and the Father are one. John 10:30, 14:9. So to know the God of the Old Testament is to know Christ. The more you see his glory and treasure his worth, the more you will be changed into his likeness, and love the way he loved, which is the fulfilling of the law. I say it again, page 46. What shall you do with the law? You who are justified by faith alone, apart from the works of the law, that's not the point. Since that we are justified apart from the law for justification, but we aren't sanctified apart from the law. This is the crux of the issue here. He says, read it and meditate on it to know more deeply than you have ever known the justice and mercy of God in Christ, your righteousness in your life. So clearly, John Piper says to consider yourself dead to the law as a Christian and to meditate on it, to know justification deeper, or know the gospel deeper, in other words. Is that what Jesus Christ said to do with the law? Alright, Piper finishes. We have to, or as far as I'm going to go on that video anyway, we have got to preach good news and not good advice as the ground of our salvation. This is all present tense, talking about obviously Christians. So to give advice, alright, and sanctification is making that the ground of our justification. That's what he's saying here. Plainly, it's what he's saying. And as far as the description we read of his take on the law from The Truth About New Calvinism, would you say that that is, quote, relaxing the law? I would say so. Thanks for listening to this video. Have a wonderful God-honoring day.